Well, hey everyone. Tim, thank you for this opportunity to make a contribution to the important work that you're doing today as a team. As you start to think about what are the next steps in having a meaningful impact on some of the outcomes that you care most about. And I guess to frame up this sort of brief input is to really just say at the core of this is we're trying to lead for sustainable improvement. I know we're trying to move the needle on targets, but behind those targets clearly are real humans who are making more progress in their learning, their level of belonging to school, their human development. We're not going to pull that off without actually building real capability within the school leadership team, the educators that are coming in and around this problem that we're trying to solve. And I know these are things that you know, but I want to emphasize again, we're not just trying to move the needle on any kind of target or priority. We're trying to change the learning and life trajectories of young people. And we're trying to do that in such a way that that school can do that not just this year and next year, but they're able to sustainably make that shift over time. And to do that, I think we all need to explore new and different ways of working. You know, that's kind of my MO, right? I'm always looking for ways of providing a practice, a tool, an approach that can help more of us lean in together and think about our work and to think about how in our work we can have an even stronger impact. So I know you're thinking about your priority areas. And look, these are the versions I've had, and you've probably iterated them 2 or 3 times since, and that's fantastic. You're trying to move the needle on literacy and numeracy, right? You and every other system that I work in the English-speaking world, whether I'm local down in Victoria last Wednesday before shooting this, the couple of days after that, Thursday, Friday, I was in South Australia. Everyone's trying to work the same thing. Or later on next week, I'm going to be online in Scotland and Wales. Guess what? Literacy and numeracy, these are hard, complex things to move beyond our current plateaus. You're working on things in attendance and building that deep connection to school and that cognitive and emotional engagement. You're working on some of the most important issues that we work on as educators around our equity and inclusion agenda, particularly around our Aboriginal student retention and attainment. And you want to make sure when we finish up in our work with our most senior students that they have the capabilities and the confidence and the right credentials to thrive post-school. I mean, these are wonderful priorities. Can I just say, I do a lot of work with Michael Fullen, and we've been doing a little bit of a set of conversations over the last little while, thinking about the last 30 years that he's been involved in school improvement work. And over again, we'll just keep saying, focus on a small number of improvement priorities. And you're doing that work. And now the question is, well, what's going to really matter? And one of the frames that I want to bring today is this idea of getting really, really clear about your actions and your strategies that you think will move the needle. And I call this, the if we do, your implementation strategies and actions. And in your document, particularly around your middle column, that's your stuff to do, you're starting to have a think about, hey, I reckon these are the things that we should work on. These are the things we should work on. And eventually, you're doing those things because you think they can actually move the needle on some of those outcomes around your core priorities. We're not just doing busy work. We're not just getting in there and spending time in schools. We're trying to move the needle on that final outcome and do it in such a way that's sustainable. And so one of the things to be thinking about is kind of what's in this list. What is in this list of implementation strategies, of DEL actions, of the actions that you think are most important to prioritize? And I want you to see this as kind of just early draft, right? Don't be too kind of locked into your first thinking. What we want to do over time is to have a think here about your actions and the focus areas of influence. And before we even start to think about the impact we want to see in the medium and shorter term, it's worth kind of just lining up and saying, are these the right actions here? Are these the actions that are most going to move the needle? The first time we write these sorts of things, we kind of just get a bit of a laundry list of all the stuff. But one of the things I want to encourage you to do is to hone in and ask some questions about these actions that you're committing to in the focus areas. I want to ask you questions around, where is there the most leverage? Like, you've got this list of a lot of things there, but I want to say, like, if you were only to do 2 of them, just 2, and you were hoping to pick the 2 that could give you the majority of the impact on the right-hand side, on those indicators, I wonder which ones you'd pick. They say, someone, I don't have to pick 2. We can have 8, we can have 10. I say, but if you forced yourself to pick 2, what would they be? I'm sure you've heard that idea of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, the idea that 20% of our efforts often give us 80% of our impact. And it's worth looking for leverage. Where are there things there that matter most, that are the essential actions that probably, in your deep experience, will account for the majority of the impact? Well, the second one I want you to be thinking about here, remember I'm talking about the things that you will do, is just from your own experience, from your own sort of debate and discussion over the next little while, and you're thinking about what are the things you will do that in time will move the needle most on those priorities. That's the question. What are the things that are going to move the needle most? And one of these things is just, which ones are going to give us the most leverage? Another one is, what about dosage? We often talk about taking actions, but what is the minimum effective dose here? When we think about treatments in other areas, we don't just think about doing something, but how much of something? What is the dosage? And so when you identify those actions and you think about the ones that matter most, have a think about what's the minimum dosage of that one to move the needle. In your experience, in your work up until now, debate this out and think about it. How many sessions? How many people? How many visits? What is that dosage? And you start to think about sharpening up those actions a little bit. And then lastly, think about voltage. And voltage we're talking about here is the outcomes that you're trying to move. They're literally things that are going to change for students. And if we're going to go change those for students, we've got to change something about the way that students think and behave. And if we're going to change something about how students think and behave, we're going to have to change what teachers believe and do and know. And in order to change what teachers believe, do, and know, a lot of the time we're going to have to do some work with our middle level leaders, head teachers, APs, AP CNIs, DPs. We're going to have to get them to do something. And actually, before that, we're going to have to get the principal to know something. And suddenly you start to get this chain where you're going to do something that's going to change what a principal does, that's going to change what an AP or a head teacher does, that's going to change what a teacher does. You kind of get that chain, right? And the question is, as you start to describe that, can you sustain the voltage from the great work you do, acting in the right way, doing those actions in the influential areas, and get it to move down that pathway of practices at a level that's powerful enough to change things for kids? In implementation science, we'll often call this a voltage drop. That sometimes you're doing the right things, but because there's so many steps to move through, by the time, in your case, it gets to the DP or the AP or the head teacher, it's already lost a lot of the voltage. And of course, by the time it gets all the way through to where we're trying to move the needle, it's not powerful enough. So here I am, I'm meant to be talking about lean monitoring, but I actually want you to first think about, before you start thinking about monitoring your impact, are you sure you've crystallized, refined, tightened up what these actions really need to be for you that you think would be predictive of moving the needle over the next 3 or so years in a sustainable way on these outcomes that matter? Well, then we say, the problem here is that often that journey between your outstanding actions in the right spot, focused in on the things that matter most, that journey from you doing the right thing to sustainable impact may well be a year, 2 years, 3 years to sustainably change some of these things. It's very likely to be multi-year rather than multi-month. So the danger is you can be there doing all this right work and you've got a good theoretical reason why in the future that's going to have that desired impact. But you've actually got no way in the short and medium term of knowing exactly where you're up to in that journey of improvement. it is possible that even as you do a lot of the things that theoretically that you and from an evidence base you think should matter, that over that time things are actually going a little bit off track within that school, and that things are actually going off track, or maybe even just falling off the pace. It's the right stuff, but it's not working at the level we need. And so all of us in our work have to have a way of gauging our progress. You know, the key question is, how at any time are we going to know whether we're on track? That's a question I learned when I was fortunate to work alongside Michael Barber in London, who is Blair's chief education architect. And he's got these questions around delivery, and he's got a great question around how at any point will we know whether or not we're on track? And it's a powerful question. How will we know if we're on track? How will we know whether we're making progress? We've got a multi-year journey, to be frank, and at any point we've got to know where we're up to. And for me, I think the answer to this is the practice of lean monitoring. The practice that all of us should be very, very clear about the actions we think matter most. And then we should make very clear predictions about not what will happen in 2 or 3 years, but what I think is what will happen in about 3 months and what will happen in about 6 months. And so we start to have that real clarity about our actions, and then we start to think about what are the lead indicators for 3 months and what are the lead or lagging indicators for 6 months. You can choose the language you want. I kind of like leading in 6 months, leading in 3 months, lagging in 6 months, and then final in multiple years. But these are both kind of these leading indicators to you. And I use the very simple language of, hey, if we do these actions, first we should see this. Like, what would you see by about the end of term 1 or early term 2? What would you see about mid-year where you're having some of these conversations? What are you likely to see? And this is the conversation that I think we need to have. It's not, by the way, a conversation that's about, putting ourselves on the hook and feeling under pressure and, I don't know whether it's going to change that much, and, I'm a bit worried about overcommitting, and who knows, it'll depend what those leaders do. It's like, it's not about performance. It's about learning. You see, if we can not just get really tight about our actions, but we can combine that with a really clear prediction about what we should see first, we can then go out into the real world, take our actions, see whether or not we see what we hope to see. And if we do see it, we can feel affirmed. And if we don't see it, we shouldn't feel judged or evaluated. We should say, I wonder what we can learn about how we implemented that first set of actions, and whether or not we need to tweak and adjust the strategies, the dosage, or the voltage. So it's a little bit like playing pool. You've probably heard me use this analogy before, but it's one thing to kind of play pool and just slam the balls, that is, take some action and see if something goes in. But it's much better to play where you say, hey, I'm going to hit this ball. I think it's going to hit the side of the table here and it's going to go in this pocket. Now, there's a really clear reason why I don't play pool this way. The ball almost never does what I want it to do. So I don't want to say that to you beforehand. But if I did, what I would set myself up with is a set of, hey, if I do this, first I'll see this, and then we'll see this. If I do this, I'm going to hit this ball first. It should hit into the wall here, and then it should go in that pocket. Now, if it doesn't go in that pocket, or it doesn't hit that wall, I'm going to have a huge amount of learning around, did I get the right angle? Did I think about this correctly? And so too in our system improvement work. If we make that prediction, we talk with each other about, hey, we're going to take these actions, and then we're going to look for these lead indicators. What that sets up for us is not an evaluation. It's not about being judged. It's about setting up great learning. Take action, predict what you'll see, go and see whether you saw it, talk about it with colleagues, and adjust what we do. Now, Michael Fullan would say this, being right at the end is much better than being right at the beginning. As we head into next year, as we set up our core actions and our lead indicators, we're not doing it because someone's going to hold us to account. We're doing it because as system level leaders, we're going to learn our way to improvement more quickly than others. And the way that we learn is we declare with great precision what we're trying to do. We predict what we'll see, and then we talk honestly about whether or not we're seeing it. If we do see it, we feel affirmed, keep going with those actions. If we don't see it, we consider whether or not we need to adjust any actions or change the dosage of the current actions. And all the while, we're learning our way into improvement. All right. So I've got three key things that I want you to be thinking about as you think about, first, really tightening up those actions. And then secondly, thinking about what needs to be in that far right-hand column. What needs to be in that indicator column? Well, firstly, predict lead indicators. This is what we've already been leading to. The idea is start to predict what you expect to see. You may know the final outcome, the fruit or the flowers that you want to see, but there's no use saying, has NAPLAN moved yet? Has the HSC results moved yet? That's likely a year or multiple years away to see the sustained growth and improvement you want to see. So instead, go looking for the lead indicators. Go looking for the buds. And these buds need to be seen much, much earlier than you're ever going to see the final outcome. And so the conversation today is, well, what would we see first that would be highly predictive that we're on track of the core outcome that we want? It's not just anything that you could see, but what could you see that would be highly predictive that you're on track to achieve the final outcome that you want? And we talk about this. What are the buds? What are the early buds that are going to give us real confidence about seeing that future flower or fruit? But so too, you can think about lead indicators that you don't want to see. If you're not seeing certain changes, then, the absence of some of the expected changes, or perhaps the continuation of old practices and ways of working, will provide you an early signal that things are off track. And there's no use just somehow hoping that you're going to hit those final outcomes. And so sometimes the lead indicators are things that you want to see, and sometimes the lead indicators might be things you don't want to keep seeing, things that have to stop. And these are a little bit like the rumble strip. You find out that you've been paying attention to your podcast and not to the road. And what do? You course correct. Why do you want to know that? Because if it wasn't there, you'll end up in the side of the road. Side of the road for school improvement, it's all paused. It's all over. We're going to have to start again next year. Hit the rumble strip, use that, course correct. Open conversations with other Dell and school improvement colleagues about what's not working and how we can course correct next term, not next year. So number one, you got to predict. This is hard, right? What will we see by this time for this school if things are going well and our actions are resulting in that improvement? Number two, I want you to then work out how you can measure or collect evidence about the things that matter most. Evidence collection is a bit of a pain. It takes time and energy. And so we're going to have to be really thoughtful about what do we care about most? What are the lean elements we care about in data collection? What do we care about most? And then use things, whether it's surveys, whether it's looking at annotated documentation, whether it's interviewing, whether it's getting all the way through to looking at samples of student work or student responses and interviews. We've got to work out how can I, as easily as possible, using either existing data or data that I'll collect, find out about the things that I think matter most at this stage of the journey. That's all I need to know. What matters most at this stage of the journey? And then lastly, we've got to normalize as teams the conversations that we need to have to study that variability. We go in there, we say, we've taken these actions, we're starting to see these things. Okay, let's learn about this and stay curious. Let's be okay with it not working in the first term or the second term. Not that it won't work everywhere, but some of the actions will be more powerful in some places than others. And this is about having a curiosity about this early data. Where is it working? Where are we having real uptick? And where is it not yet landing? And what's working or not working for whom, why, and under what conditions? That's the conversation we want to have. And I want to suggest we should be having that conversation about termly. Doesn't need to be more than 25 minutes. We look at our actions. We look at the early lead indicators that we can or can't see, and we try to learn our way forward from that point. So what I've tried to do today is to help us get set up to learn our way into improvement. The outcomes you want to change are outcomes that a generation of people, or two, have tried to change and haven't actually had a lot of sustained improvement. We know there have been bright spots. We know certain schools and certain classrooms and certain places have turned it around, but we haven't seen in New South Wales that kind of performance directorate, broad network improvement in certain areas. And what you're doing is you're bringing a systemic approach to this, whole network and beyond improvement around these core focus areas. And I think the way to set up for this next phase of work with a real degree of precision is to be clear about those middle columns and be clear about, are these the right strategies? And do we have the right ones at the right dosage with the right voltage? And then once we've got that set up, we're getting in together and we're talking about what are these lead indicators? What would change first? And yes, there's some evidence we can draw on here, some research evidence, but we also need to draw on your deep experience in schools. You know the schools you've led, you know the schools you've coached, the schools you've been side by side, and you're going to be great predictors of how much change is typically possible over a term and over 2 terms, over a term and over 2 terms. And you're talking with each other and you're calibrating what should we expect to see, and then how could we collect some information to know whether or not we're on track. Let's summarize this by saying that lean monitoring is not about a final evaluation. It's not about making judgments about whether it worked or didn't work. It's about setting up the feedback loop for learning, where we're getting a real connection between our actions and what we're seeing, and our actions and what we're seeing. And as we can take clear actions, see whether or not we're moving that lead indicator, we get ourselves to learn our way into the work. And in 6 months from now, I would expect those actions to be updated. Not because they were wrong, because they were a great first draft, early hypothesis. But as you get into the work, they're going to become more precise, more nuanced. You might drop a few out. You might re-emphasize certain things, because as you track what you do and what you see, and then what you do and then what you see, you're going to get sharper and sharper and clearer about what works for which schools, when, and under what conditions. And that is at the heart of improvement for learning. Lean monitoring, and the work we're talking about precision here, is really the only approach to take on complex contextual challenges like the ones you've committed to in these strategies and these priorities. And I hope some of these ideas and some of these inputs are going to be useful to the deep contextual conversations you need to have about the actions you'll prioritize and the evidence that you could collect to know over the short term through lead indicators whether or not it seems like you're on track. I look forward to continuing the conversation the next time we engage. All the best, and I hope this has been helpful.